What's happening at the supermarket isn't just a crisis, it's a silent war being fought in our shopping carts. But who's really losing? Today, we bring you the ultimate ranking no one has ever dared to make. 27 European Union countries, from the least to the most affected by rising grocery costs over the past 10 years. But we won't just show you the numbers. We'll dig deep to expose the real culprits behind every position, from disastrous political decisions to the greed of food industry giants, and even the role the euro itself has played in all of this. And here's a spoiler. The country that suffered the most devastating impact will leave you speechless. Welcome to Amazing Europe. Number 27. Sweden. How did it manage to contain the price surge? The first secret lies in its currency, the Swedish krona. But be careful, other non-euro countries actually saw their prices explode. So the point isn't simply having a different currency, but using it wisely. Having the krona gave Sweden's central bank the power to act with full autonomy, shaping monetary policies tailored to its specific inflation. It was a flexible shield, something other non-euro countries, for different reasons, failed to use as effectively. The second secret is the fierce supermarket war triggered by discount chains. Discount stores exist everywhere, true, but the Swedish market was unique. It had been dominated for decades by three giants with little price competition. The aggressive arrival of new discount chains wasn't just ordinary competition, it was a real revolution that shattered the old economic balance, forcing the big players to avoid raising prices too much or risk losing their customers. For these and other reasons, Swedes now pay 17.5% more for groceries compared to 10 years ago. Number 26. Cyprus. Cyprus is an island that, on paper, almost looks like an economic miracle, but its very nature is both its greatest strength and, during this crisis, its greatest weakness. Being an island means relying heavily on imports for many goods, including food and energy. So, when global supply chains broke down and transport costs exploded, the impact on Cyprus was direct and unavoidable. The government in Nicosia didn't just sit and watch. It played a major card by removing VAT on essential goods such as bread, milk, vegetables and eggs in an attempt to shield its citizens. This certainly helped, but it wasn't enough to stop the shockwave on iconic products like olive oil, whose production was devastated by drought. The result of this uneven battle? Over 10 years, grocery costs rose by 17.8%. Number 25. France. In France, the price crisis turned into a public war. The government declared battle against so-called greedflation, accusing major companies of raising prices far beyond real costs just to inflate their profits. It was a move with great media impact, but in practice, it turned out to be more talk than action, unable to truly stop the price hikes. Meanwhile, supermarkets responded by labelling affected products with shrinkflation warnings, a trick where the package gets smaller, but the price stays the same. This was a welcome transparency effort, but again, it didn't fix the root problem. And while politicians and retailers fought with public statements, real tension exploded in the countryside. Farmers blocked highways with their tractors to protest the disconnect between their unsustainable production costs and the rock-bottom prices forced on them by large distributors. For French families, the outcome of this war, fought more with words than concrete measures, was a tangible 18% increase in grocery bills. Number 24. Belgium. Imagine a country where, by law, your salary and benefits automatically rise with inflation. It sounds like the perfect solution to shield yourself from the rising cost of living, right? Welcome to Belgium, where this mechanism, unique in Europe, has proven to be a powerful double-edged sword. On one hand, automatic indexation provided immediate relief to households. On the other, it triggered a dangerous price-wage spiral. Companies, forced to raise wages, passed those extra costs directly onto consumers. To make matters worse, speculation came into play. The Competition Authority launched investigations into profit margins in the food industry, suspecting many had ridden the wave of price hikes. And while politicians in Brussels debated, farmers were blocking the city, caught between production costs and pressure from large retailers. The outcome of this complex machine? a 20.3% increase in grocery prices over the last 10 years. Number 23. Finland. In Finland, the story turns into a paradox. 80% of the country's food retail market is controlled by just two giants, K Group and S Group, a near-perfect duopoly, a situation that should, in theory, be a recipe for disaster when it comes to prices. And indeed, when global crises hit, this weak competition allowed both companies to pass costs easily onto consumers. Yet Finland is not at the top of our ranking. Why not? The answer lies in the nature of these two giants. Their massive scale and extremely efficient logistics networks, while not guaranteeing low prices, likely helped absorb part of the external shocks better than a more fragmented market could have. Moreover, in a country like Finland, being so dominant also means being constantly under public scrutiny. There is an unspoken pact, a kind of social and political pressure that limits how far prices can rise before triggering national outrage. The result of this strange balance is a 23.8% increase in food prices over 10 years. Number 22. Luxembourg. Even the richest country in the European Union is facing a major paradox. Luxembourg's citizens are protected by a powerful wage indexation system, known as the index, which is automatically triggered by law whenever accumulated inflation exceeds 2.5%. A safety net that, as we've seen, can turn into a double-edged sword, fueling a constant race between company costs and consumer prices. In addition, the Grand Duchy is almost entirely dependent on food imports, feeling the full force of every disruption in global supply chains. But the real anomaly, the factor that changes the game, is cross-border shopping. For tens of thousands of residents and cross-border workers, it only takes a few kilometers to do their shopping in Germany, France, or Belgium. This flight to cheaper markets acts as an extremely powerful informal brake. Local supermarkets know they can't raise prices indefinitely, or they'll be left with empty stores. In this complex balance between protected wages and foreign competition, grocery prices have risen by 24.8%. Number 21. Italy. In Italy, the crisis struck a deep chord in the nation's identity. The trigger, of course, was the country's heavy dependence on foreign energy. When gas prices exploded, the cost of agricultural and industrial production spiraled out of control, from fertilizers to transport. But for many Italians, this is only part of the story, often seen as a convenient excuse. There is a growing belief that the real root of the problem lies in a poorly regulated domestic market, dominated by large retailers that dictate the rules, crushing producers with extremely low purchasing prices, then inflating prices for consumers. On top of this tension came climate fury. The historic drought that dried up the Po River, the agricultural heart of the nation, devastated rice, tomato, and animal feed production, causing ripple effects on meat prices. The government tried to intervene with the anti-inflation quota, a voluntary agreement with retailers that many criticised as a symbolic and ineffective move. The result was a 32% increase in grocery prices over the past 10 years. Number 20. Greece. Here, more than anywhere else, the debate focused on a very specific public enemy, Ischrakerdia, the Greek word for greedflation. The Athens government engaged in a very public showdown with major multinational corporations, openly accusing them of unfair pricing and imposing significant fines in an effort to show that it was standing with the people. But while politicians battled the corporate giants, nature dealt its harshest blow. The price of olive oil, the soul of Greek cuisine and culture, literally exploded due to disastrous harvests, turning an essential good into a luxury item. To contain the emergency, the government introduced measures such as the family basket, an agreement with supermarkets to cap the weekly prices of a list of essential items. However, many Greeks saw it more as a band-aid than a cure. The result of this storm, mixing the scars of past economic crises with present-day speculation, is a 33.3% surge in grocery costs. Number 19. Spain. Here, the crisis took the face of one of the country's most iconic products, a symbol that nearly became a luxury good, olive oil. Spain, the world's largest producer, was brought to its knees by an unprecedented drought that decimated harvests and sent prices skyrocketing. The situation became so dramatic that supermarkets were forced to place anti-theft tags on bottles, as if they were fine liquors. In response to the emergency, the Madrid government launched a drastic and historic move. It completely eliminated VAT on essential items like bread, milk, fruits and vegetables, and reduced it from 10% to 5% on olive oil and pasta. This major intervention certainly softened the blow, but it couldn't stop the avalanche. In fact, the country's strong dependence on imported gas made its economy extremely vulnerable to the surge in global prices. The final result was a total increase of 35.2% in grocery costs over the past 10 years. Number 18. Austria. In the collective imagination, Austria is a happy island, a symbol of wealth, stability, and high quality of life. Yet behind this flawless facade, a surge in prices has unfolded, leaving many analysts puzzled. The main reason has a precise name: market concentration. In Austria, nearly all grocery retail is controlled by just 3 giants, forming a de facto oligopoly that allowed them to call the shots. When the energy crisis, worsened by the country's heavy dependence on Russian gas, sent costs soaring along the entire supply chain, the retail giants had little trouble passing every cent onto consumers with no fear of real competition. On top of this comes a unique factor: tourism. Constant demand from tourists helps keep prices above average. The government responded by creating an anti-inflation commission. However, it was widely criticised as a toothless tiger, unable to enforce real control. The result? A 39.8% increase in grocery prices. Number 17. Ireland. They used to call it the Celtic Tiger for its explosive economic growth, but today its citizens are fighting a fierce battle at the supermarket. To the global shock of energy and raw materials, which hits an island especially hard, was added a unique political and economic earthquake: Brexit. The historic and well-oiled trade routes with Britain, used for decades to import goods, were shattered. This forced Ireland to reinvent many of its supply chains, establishing new direct routes from the European continent, inevitably longer, more complex, and more expensive. In this context, the large supermarket chains that dominate the Irish market were able to transfer every additional cost directly to consumers. The result of this perfect storm, combining geographic and political isolation: a 40.5% spike in grocery prices. Number 16. Malta. If there is one country that embodies total vulnerability to external shocks, it is Malta. Imagine an entire nation that must import almost everything it consumes by sea, from food to energy. Every single disruption in supply chains, every increase in fuel costs for ships, is passed directly and unfiltered onto its citizens. To prevent economic and social collapse, the Maltese government responded with unprecedented force, spending a huge share of its budget to freeze energy and fuel prices and to subsidise imported grains. It was a desperate and incredibly costly move, an attempt to build a dam to stop a tsunami. This dam held, shielding the population from total disaster, but it could not stop imported inflation on all other products not covered by aid. The result of this titanic struggle of an island against the global market? A rise in grocery costs nearing 42%. Number 15. Germany. For the first time in our analysis, we come across a country where grocery prices have increased more than the EU average. And that country, against all expectations, is Germany. But how is this possible? Germany, the economic powerhouse of Europe, the homeland of discount chains like Aldi and Lidl that taught the world how to shop cheaply. The answer lies in a deep and painful root: the massive, strategic dependence on cheap Russian gas. When the taps were turned off, Germany's entire productive system began to shake. The low-cost energy that fueled its mighty industries, including the agri-food sector, vanished overnight. Even the discount chains, built on an extremely efficient model, had no margin to absorb the shock and were forced to pass the price hikes directly on to consumers. In the face of this crisis, government measures, like the various aid packages, were widely criticised as insufficient and poorly targeted. Unlike other countries that took direct action, by cutting VAT on essential goods. The result is a turning point. For the first time, we cross the EU average of 42.6%. Grocery prices in Germany have surged by 44.9%. Number 14. Denmark. In the common imagination, Denmark is a wealthy nation with an exceptionally high quality of life. That's certainly true, but it too has faced a harsh wave of price hikes. The energy crisis caused production and animal feed costs to skyrocket, turning some everyday products into near-luxury items. But Denmark's real issue lies in its currency. Unlike Sweden, the Danish krone is tightly pegged to the euro. In fact, its central bank is required to keep the krone's value within an extremely narrow margin relative to the euro. This forces Denmark to shadow the interest rate decisions made by the European Central Bank in Frankfurt. As a result, it loses the flexible shield and monetary autonomy that neighbouring Sweden still enjoys, and ends up importing a monetary policy that isn't tailored to its specific needs. Faced with this situation, the Danish government has been more hesitant than others, delaying cuts to VAT on essential goods. This mix of high energy costs and a chained monetary policy has led to a 47.3% explosion in grocery prices. Number 13. The Netherlands. We now arrive in the most paradoxical agricultural country in Europe, the Netherlands. We're talking about the second largest agricultural exporter in the world, a superpower that has turned farming into a high-tech science. And yet, this very strength has become its greatest weakness. Their famously advanced greenhouses, which grow vegetables for the whole continent, are incredibly energy-intensive. When gas prices exploded, the heart of the Dutch production system was thrown into chaos, with costs soaring. On top of this energy crisis came a full-blown internal war. The government imposed extremely strict environmental policies to cut nitrogen emissions, triggering the now iconic and fierce protests by farmers with their tractors. This clash between ecology and agriculture created a climate of uncertainty, which further affected production and prices. The result of this short circuit between technology, energy, and politics? A 48.5% spike in grocery prices. Number 12. Slovenia. This small alpine gem, efficient and orderly, seemed to have everything it needed to withstand the crisis. Yet its greatest strength, being a crossroads of Europe, perfectly integrated with the powerful economies of Austria, Italy, and Germany, became its curse. When prices exploded in those neighbouring giants, little Slovenia simply imported inflation, like a flood wave overwhelming a low dam, without having the critical mass to fight back. The government responded with an almost academic move. It launched an official online portal to monitor and compare grocery basket prices across major supermarkets, hoping that transparency alone would be enough to calm the market. A commendable and unique idea, but one that clashed with the harsh reality of skyrocketing energy costs and record price hikes on products like sugar and dairy. The result? Grocery prices soared by an astonishing 52.2%. Number 11. Czech Republic. We leave the Eurozone for our 11th spot and enter a country that, on paper, should have had an advantage. Having its own currency, the koruna, was supposed to give the central bank in Prague the flexibility to tailor the fight against inflation. But this time, the shield didn't work. The country saw a true wave of social anger, summed up by the slogan, "Czechia is expensive." The finger wasn't pointed so much at global crises, but at a domestic market dominated by a few powerful supermarket chains, most of them foreign. The price of sugar, which skyrocketed to record levels, became the symbol of speculation. Faced with a public demanding bold action, the government was accused of being too timid. It merely created monitoring committees and held meetings with producers and distributors, without imposing real sanctions or effective price controls. The result was an explosion in grocery costs of 57.9%. Number 10. Lithuania. For many Europeans, the energy crisis was an economic issue. For Lithuania, it was a matter of national survival. Bordering Belarus and the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad, the country made a decision as bold as it was painful to cut all energy ties with Russia, sooner and more decisively than anyone else. a principled act that came with a very steep price. The entire production system was hit by a shockwave, with energy costs for agriculture and the food industry soaring to unsustainable levels. Prices of products at the heart of the Baltic table, bread, meat, and especially dairy, exploded. Faced with this emergency, the government tried to respond with subsidies and aid, but it was like trying to empty the sea with a bucket. For Lithuanians, grocery prices became the visible price of national security and independence. The final outcome of this geopolitical choice, a 63% increase in food costs. Number 9. Portugal. At first glance, Portugal shares the same wounds as neighbouring Spain, a heavy reliance on imported energy and a historic drought that has crippled agricultural production. But here, the crisis struck at the very heart of national identity in an even deeper and more paradoxical way. Think of fish, the soul of Portuguese cuisine. It's a shocking fact, but today, Portugal, despite its vast Atlantic coastline, is forced to import the majority of the fish it consumes because its fleet, crushed by fuel costs, is no longer competitive. Faced with this emergency, the government played a desperate card, the zero VAT operation, a total tax cut on a basket of 46 essential goods. But the move, intended to provide immediate relief, turned out to be a losing battle. Major retailers were accused of not fully passing the benefits on to consumers. The final bill? An explosion in grocery prices, nearing 70%. Number 8. Estonia. Often called the Silicon Valley of Europe, Estonia is seen as a model of digital capitalism and free market ideals. Yet this very model became a deadly trap during the crisis. Like the other Baltic republics, Estonia paid the highest price for its geopolitical position. It decisively and on principle cut all energy ties with Russia. The resulting shock was swift and severe. But unlike others, Estonia's economic doctrine, based on minimal state interference, left its citizens with almost no protection. While other governments introduced subsidies, slashed VAT or imposed price controls, Estonia stuck to its principles, trusting that the market alone would find a new balance. This faith in the free market, however, was powerless against such brutal imported inflation. The costs were passed directly and unfiltered onto consumers, who faced the emergency with very little help. The result? A 70.9% surge in grocery prices. Number 7. Romania. We now enter one of Europe's great breadbaskets, which also fell victim to a dramatic paradox. The war in neighbouring Ukraine, instead of lowering prices with an influx of cheap grain, unleashed a devastating crisis. Massive amounts of low-cost Ukrainian cereals flooded the market, bankrupting thousands of Romanian farmers who couldn't compete. The result was fierce protests that brought the country to a standstill. While farmers fought for survival, retail prices for consumers, especially for staples like milk, bread and cheese, kept rising inexplicably. Faced with what looked like blatant speculation along the supply chain, the government made a desperate move. It imposed a legal cap not on final prices, but on the profit margins of distributors. But even that wasn't enough. The outcome? A staggering 79.7% increase in grocery prices. Number 6. Hungary. This country fought its price war with a unique and, according to some, controversial strategy. Faced with soaring inflation, the Budapest government responded in the most direct way possible. It legally imposed a price cap on essential goods like sugar, flour, milk, and oil. But this bold economic experiment turned out to be a powerful double-edged sword. While the prices of those few items were frozen, the move created a devastating chain reaction. Supermarkets, forced to sell at a loss, responded in two ways: by leaving the shelves of capped products often empty, and by drastically raising the prices of everything else to make up for the losses. On top of this self-inflicted crisis came the chronic weakness of Hungary's currency, the forint, which sent the cost of all imported goods skyrocketing. The result of this policy? A shopping basket explosion of 84.9%. Number 5. Croatia. For Croatia, January 1st, 2023 was supposed to be a day of national celebration. The adoption of the euro, the final seal of its integration into the heart of Europe. But the celebration didn't last long. Within 24 hours, the country plunged into chaos and outrage. Citizens reported a wave of wild and unjustified price hikes, accusing shopkeepers and restaurant owners of using the currency change to shamelessly round up prices. The reaction of the Zagreb government was furious. It publicly threatened to create blacklists of dishonest companies, to freeze prices, and to impose new taxes in an unprecedented head-on clash with the business world. This euro shock hit an already fragile situation caused by high energy costs in a country where tourism plays a major role in the economy and helps keep prices high. The final result of this political and monetary earthquake: a 96.1% increase in grocery costs. Number 4. Latvia. Here, as in its Baltic sisters, the story of prices is a story of national security. The decision to cut all energy ties with Russia was the spark that lit an economic fire like no other. But why was the impact even more devastating here? Latvia was hit by a perfect storm. On top of the energy shock that crippled both industry and agriculture, the country suffered from especially aggressive imported inflation on all consumer goods. In a relatively small and undiversified market, every single global shock hit local prices with extreme force. The government tried to intervene with aid and subsidies, but in the face of this economic hurricane, the measures proved insufficient. Citizens saw their grocery costs explode by a staggering 100.9%. Number 3. Slovakia. This country found itself trapped in a double economic prison. The first prison was its total energy dependence. For decades, Slovak industry and households ran almost entirely on cheap Russian gas and oil. When the crisis hit and the supply was cut off, the economy suffered a shock of unprecedented violence. But it was the second prison that proved fatal. Unlike its neighbours in the Visegrad Group, Poland, Hungary and the Czech Republic, Slovakia is in the Eurozone. While the others, with mixed results, used their national currencies and central banks to try to curb inflation, Bratislava had its hands tied, forced to accept the one-size-fits-all monetary policy of the European Central Bank, which was ill-suited to an emergency of this scale. This deadly mix, combined with a market dominated by a few supermarket chains, caused a 101.1% increase in grocery prices. Number 2. Poland. In second place, the nation that overturns every assumption, Poland. Here, the paradox becomes a drama. We've seen Slovakia trapped by the euro, so Poland, with its independent zloty, should have been the hero of our story, right? Wrong. Its situation is even worse. How is that possible? Because having your own currency is not a magic wand. It's a tool that, in order to work, requires impeccable use under extreme conditions. And Poland faced the most extreme conditions in Europe. Proximity to the war and the reception of millions of refugees created a demand shock never seen before, triggering panic and a shopping psychosis for goods like sugar. Faced with this blaze, the central banks and government's countermeasures were seen by many as too weak and too late. And so the zloty, instead of acting as a shield, was simply swept away by the shockwave. The result? An explosion in grocery costs of 116.3%. Before we reveal number 1, we ask you to support our project with a like by subscribing to the channel and clicking the bell so you don't miss our new videos. And don't forget our new channel, America vs. Europe, where we rank European countries, US states and Canadian provinces based on various factors. Number 1. Bulgaria. Here, the tragedy takes the shape of a cruel paradox. Bulgaria, the poorest country in the European Union, is the one that suffered the most violent price increases. But how did that happen? The answer lies in a monetary trap unique in Europe. Bulgaria does not use the euro, but its currency, the lev, is tied to a mechanism called a currency board, which pegs it at a fixed and unshakable exchange rate with the euro. It's the worst of both worlds. It lacks the stability and influence of a Eurozone member, yet it also lacks the slightest flexibility of an independent currency. It cannot use interest rates, it cannot devalue, it cannot do anything. It's like a boxer forced into the ring with hands tied behind their back. When global inflation exploded, Bulgaria was completely at the mercy of events, forced to passively import the monetary policy of Frankfurt without any protection. The result of this structural powerlessness, a staggering 147.8% increase. And now, we'd like to hear your opinion. What are the real causes of price increases in your country? What should be done? Is having a single currency a blessing or a curse in times of crisis? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to find out which European countries are easiest or hardest to make ends meet in, we recommend watching this video where we'll explore the situation in every country across the continent. That's all for this video. See you next time.